Welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. In case you're wondering, this is Twitter for Science, so if you're not interested in Twitter, this is probably the wrong room. It's great to see all of you here. So just a brief introduction. This event is sort of part of our lead up to the event surrounding the March for Science, which is on April 22nd. We've got a number of our UCSF scientists and staff and faculty and students and postdocs are going to DC to actually participate in the March for Science there. And then of course there's a satellite march in San Francisco. And we wanted to take the opportunity to introduce more of our UCSF scientists and staff and support to Twitter. The idea is we want to prepare you for sharing your events, or your experiences and your photos of your experiences at the March as a nice introduction to the way that science is talked about on Twitter, the way that scientists engage with the public and with each other on Twitter, and how UCSF uses Twitter to share the research that we do here. And so I'm going to briefly introduce our panel. So first we have Arzu Sarvastani, who is our social media manager for UCSF and University Relations. Jamie Fraser, who's an associate professor in Department of Bioengineering. School Pharmacy. And Medicine.
And Medicine.
And Medicine. We have, who's next? Stephen Floor is our going to be a brand newly minted assistant professor in biochemistry and biophysics starting this fall. He's also a graduate of UCSF.
Cell and tissue biology.
Okay. Oh, you're cell and tissue biology? And then Kevin Eisman, our director of audience strategy, again in UCSF University Relations. So this event is actually co-hosted by 3 groups. There's the UCSF Graduate Division, the Science Policy Group. We've got a couple of organizers who are here with us in the audience, as well as University Relations. So with that, I'm going to welcome our presenters and invite them to get started.
All right. Welcome, everybody.
Hello.
Hi. Do we want to flip to the next slide?
Just to take note,
yeah.
Twitter handles if you want to tweet at us or about us or nice things.
Remember, it's all public?
No bad.
Everybody say science.
Science.
So first up, just quickly, what are we going to cover today? This can also tell you what we're not going to cover today. We're going to move through the first 3 things pretty quickly and get to the core of what this presentation is supposed to be about, what the value might be for scientists being on Twitter, what you can get out of it, and how you can avoid some pitfalls. So first up, next, please. I'm going to go over quickly what university relations is because there was a study that came out, I think, in PLOS One a couple years ago, maybe a year or 2 ago, studying scientists on Twitter. And the #1 complaint about why they weren't getting on Twitter is because they weren't either understanding what Twitter was or how to get on it, or they weren't sure that the university supported it. And one thing we want to say unequivocally is that UCSF supports people being on social media and talking about their work. And University Relations is a department at UCSF that can help you. So Arzu and I are members of University Relations, and University Relations is made up of these 5 groups, and I quickly just wanted to go over it so you all know what resources you have available to you at UCSF. The first being strategic communications, which is closely linked to brand communications. That is trying to figure out what is the overall message of UCSF and how are we appearing out in the world. So if you look at the shuttle fleet, the shuttle stops, some of the ads throughout town, that's the team that does that, and those people sit right next to Arzu and I. Community and government relations, you may have seen a couple of emails coming out in the last 3 or 4 months about the ZSFGH research building trying to get approved at ZSFGH and asking you to advocate on behalf of UCSF to your supervisors. That's that team. So they work closely with the neighbors at UCSF and local government, federal government, to get UCSF's reputation out there. Public affairs, this is the team that whenever you have a paper coming out or you have a really great story that you think belongs in the Chronicle, that's the team to contact. They work closely with media across the country and have really good relationships. They're the people that can hook you up with those kinds of stories. And lastly, and I think most importantly, Arzu and I's team, digital communications. So we run the UCSF social media channels, ucsf.edu. We publish all the stories that go up there. And then we also advise across campus for people who need help, want to get started on their own, or want to start UCSF. So that's University Relations in a nutshell. If you have more questions, just Google UCSF University Relations. There's more info online. Next slide. So another thing I wanted to cover quickly is Arzu, as social media manager, runs the main UCSF accounts, so the primary enterprise accounts at UCSF essentially on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, a couple other places. But since we're talking about Twitter today, the UCSF Twitter channel really focuses on three things. The first is breaking UCSF news. So whenever we have a great story that comes out, it publishes, we publish the headline and link through. The other thing is that we participate in a lot of online conversations about UCSF or UCSF's work. And then the third and last is we participate in a lot of events. So for example, the Precision Public Health Conference, the Precision Medicine World Conference, lots of other scientific conferences that happen, and a lot of the, I guess, conversation and dialogue that happens at those events, as you may know, happens on Twitter. So UCSF is also a presence there. Those are the three main reasons that UCSF is on Twitter and what we kind of focus on. And lastly, before I turn it over to Arzu, I just wanted to let you all know that we do have policies and guidelines for personal and official use of Twitter and other social media channels. And really, again, like I said, we're here to help you and we want to encourage that. These are to keep everybody out of trouble, right? So if you have any questions, they should be answered at those links. If not, feel free to come up and talk to us after the event, or you can always be emailed at socialmedia@ucsf.edu. So just so everybody knows, we do have guidelines here, but
this ends the plausible deniability.
Exactly.
for me, for knowing about those
There you go.
guidelines.
So anyway, I'm going to turn it over to Arzu to talk a little bit more about how to stay out of trouble and how to get the most out of Twitter.
All right, so the key point is, I know this can be a little bit daunting, but really the main message to take away is just don't be scared to get on Twitter, just be sensible. Things you wouldn't want to say face-to-face to somebody at a networking, a cocktail party at a scientific conference, don't say it on social media either. A few basics, don't speak on behalf of UCSF. No, we have our own Twitter account, you learned about it, we can speak for ourselves, thank you very much. So don't purport to have the mentality of UCSF as a whole, speak for yourself, it's totally fine. Keep advocacy and politics out of work hours. This is because as a state agency, we do have restrictions on what university resources can be spent on, and a lot of political advocacy is outside of the scope of what resources are legally allowed to be spent on. So you can say whatever you like, just don't use university resources to do it, and everybody should be good. And be honest about who you are. This is mostly a best practice. Don't rely on anonymity to protect you, to go out there and say things that you wouldn't want to explain to a journalist later. People will be able to track you down. There's IP tracking. There's lots of different things. Be honest and upfront about who you are. You are a scientist. You are a researcher. You are whatever you may be. Be open and upfront about it. There's no reason to hide it. There's no point in hiding it. Don't feed the trolls. This is another best practice. Who knows what a troll is? Heard of social media trolls?
Online troll.
Excellent. Okay. Oh wait, actually.
Not a troll dog.
Oh well, yeah. Who knows what a social media troll is or an online troll is? Where's the room? Okay. Okay. Good. So I don't know if you've heard the phrase "don't feed the trolls." There is no good reason to interact with a troll. A troll is described as somebody who's just there to get a rise out of you, to say something flagrantly upsetting or racist or just wrong in order to get you to interact. And the second you've interacted, they've already won. There's no point in trying to correct them. There's no point in trying to demonstrate how flawed they are in their thinking. Leave them alone, and that's the only way. The only way to win is not to play. Okay.
So I'm just going to say,
Sometimes the only way to win is to punch a Nazi.
I fail at that miserably. So, I mean, if people are being flagrantly offensive, then I won't engage. But if somebody is, you know, if you talk about GMOs, for example, you will discover that there's a lot of people that have strong troll-like opinions on GMOs, and I find it irresistible to respond to those. So,
This is like
There
a
are people who
weird
want
line.
GMOs in our food system.
that's true.
Wow. I'm all
I
organic.
only eat GMOs.
Yeah.
That's a good point, is that there is like a weird blurry line between people who are just maybe misguided or have wrong information and people who are just saying garbage to get you to respond. It can be hard to find that line.
It's usually the second reply. Like if somebody seems on the fence and you say something reasonable and then they respond with something that's even more unreasonable, then you figure it out that it's not worth your time.
Can we back up one, though, about being honest about who you are? Because some of the best people to follow from a scientific perspective on Twitter are anonymous. Or not anonymous, or pseudonymous. They use pseudonyms.
Or you just have a rogue account.
No, like people who are, even like people who I know now who they are. I've had conversations in real life, but are, go by pseudonyms. Know a lot about NIH policies. Like Drug Monkey is this guy who, just have learned so much about writing grants and just the way the NIH system works and thinking about that from just. So I think there's levels of being honest about who you are. If you're going to go by a pseudonym, I feel like it's important to be honest in terms of representing your views. But I think there's a role for pseudonym accounts, especially for people to be able to engage in meaningful conversations while being protected from their identity. It's like the same way we have anonymous peer review. Not everybody reviews anonymously, but I think it's really important that the option to be anonymous is there. So it's interesting.
I think that's a good point. I think that being honest about who you are is always being honest about what your name is, but it's being honest about your expertise.
Yeah.
So don't purport to be a person who works at the NIH if you're not, right? I think that's the kind of where you really don't want to go.
Yeah. You guys can just be anonymously working at the greatest university for biomedical research in the country. You don't have to say which one.
Although it's obvious.
Yes.
So the last point, we are here for you. Kevin and I, other people in university relations, if you ever get into a weird issue, you don't know what to do, you're not sure where to go, we are where to go. So feel free to come to us if anything happens. You can come to us too. All right, so we're going to talk about what Twitter is actually good for. So this is not so much a how-to. We're not going to talk about what a hashtag is or how to use an @sign. This is about what can you actually get out of Twitter. Why should you even bother? You're all very smart people. You can figure out Twitter, I'm sure of it. So we're going to talk about what you can do once you get there and how to use it to the best of what it's actually useful for. So you're not wasting your time and getting sucked into that Twitter time abyss.
Should we ask maybe how many people are on Twitter already?
Yeah, how many
So,
people?
How many people could you consider yourself a regular user?
School of Pharmacy.
Oh wow, actually a lot.
How many people just signed up in the last week? Nice.
Yay.
Welcome.
Welcome.
How many people haven't dove in yet? And you're hoping to get the basics? Okay.
You signed up 5 years ago, once.
5 years ago. Who signed up 5 years ago once, tweeted once, and then never touched it again?
Yeah, so I signed up originally in 2009 or something, and then it was just sitting there. It's just like a placeholder for my name, and then decided for some reason, there's one person I can blame it on, to actually start using it. So that's an option too.
And we'll talk about just lurking on Twitter as well. There's nothing wrong with having an account and using it just to learn. It's perfectly good use.
Absolutely.
So that's one of the things we're going to talk about today. What is Twitter good for? 4 main things we'll go with today: learning, connecting, sharing, and advocating. You don't have to just take our word for it. We did put out a call to scientists on Twitter, and we asked them, why are you on Twitter? What do you get from it? We'll talk about some of the responses that came through that way from real users. So let's talk about the most basic way to use Twitter, which is just to learn. This is sometimes called lurking if you're just sort of around in the atmosphere but you never post anything. But it's a great way to stay current. Yeah, it's a lot of people, and they've got billions of accounts, and they definitely don't have billions of daily tweets. So, so you can use this to track your field, of course, see what other scientists and scientific organizations are talking about. Oftentimes groups will publish to Twitter before they even publish to their website, if they publish to their website at all, just because it's a lower cost way to get information out there. You can also track trending topics, so beyond just what's new, you can see what people are talking about. Like what's the buzz, what are people either harping on or really praising, see what the conversation is around a subject, and then participating in conferences, which is huge. It's probably my main way of engaging with Twitter. Being at an event or being part of a community, a conversation, whether it's in real, like a physical location, or whether it's just a virtual conversation, participating from afar is a huge benefit. And just as an example, from one of our respondents, find out about new research, but mostly what's trending. And of course, interacting is a big key as well.
Yeah, so we asked a couple days ago, we asked all of the UCSF Twitter scientists to weigh in on this question that we're trying to answer.
So I'm assuming this is something that you both use pretty regularly as well, learning about information. Do you find this to be better than other ways, or?
It's, yeah, in addition, I'm fairly anal retentive about the way I track the scientific literature, and I've written like really long things about that. I don't think Twitter is a great, should be the only way you stay on top of reading, especially within your field, but I find I like learn about a lot of weird, especially weird things. You know, nothing that's really like influenced my scientific directions. But as far as participating in meetings and remotely, that I find I do a lot. Like I find there are a lot of meetings where I'm not, you know, attending, but that are in my area that then, you know, they have the hashtag, and then at the end of the day, I don't follow it live, but like at the end of the day, you can just click on that and you can just like feel like you were there. Or last year, there was a Gordon conference that I showed up to like 2 days late because of childcare stuff, and I was like tweeting alongside. It was I know you're not supposed to tweet at Gordon conference, but it was mostly like an industry Gordon conference, computer-aided drug design. And so I had a very active like Twitter discussion, and when I got there, people were like waiting for me to like have this like real life meetup because I was asking questions during the talks and stuff like that through that discussion. So it was kind of fun.
Yeah, I mean, it strongly depends on the conference, how engaged people are.
Yeah.
I was at a meeting in February where they had their own hashtag and published it through newsletters and everything, and I think there were like 3 tweets.
Yeah.
You know, if it's an experimental meeting, you'll find that there's a lot less activity on Twitter. If it's a computational meeting, like every single talk will be being posted by 10 people. So there's a real selection for different kinds of science that gets posted on Twitter. I definitely do use it to learn about papers. I agree that you learn more about sort of strange papers than papers that are in your field that you would have read anyway. But the biggest thing for me is that it actually sort of transforms a publication from something that's, you know, this archaic standalone thing that's 10 pages of text that you may or may not read to a dialogue, where if you, I mean, I'll give you one example. Somebody had looked at the relationship between error in sequencing gene expression calls as a function of the number of replicates. And they started with 3 replicates, and I was curious what it would look like if there were 2 replicates. So I just asked the first author of that, and he actually ran that analysis and then posted that on Twitter. And so it actually can transform what's a sort of static publication into something that's actually a living and communicating thing where you can actually talk to the authors and ask them specific questions.
And polls in other people, because you
Yeah.
could have that over email, and just like it would be just the 2 of you.
Absolutely, but now it's out
someone
there,
else
and then it can be shared with the world. So anybody else that was curious about that same question or wants to chime in with a different one can now engage in the conversation.
Yeah, that might, in my opinion, might be the most valuable part of Twitter, is that it does have the ability to transcend from just a one-way thing to that two-way thing, especially around conferences. If you're at all shy, it's like the best way to make a soft introduction to somebody. So you can see them in the hallway and they'll know your face, or they'll remember something you said, and then it's not that cold call sort of feeling. You're just walking up to people. And if you're good at that, more power to you. But if you're not, a little like, hey, I saw your talk, interesting, you know, publication or great graph, or loved what you did, can go a long way towards kind of bringing that conversation together.
Twitter also feels a lot more personal than email, and I feel like there's people that if you send them an email and they don't know who you are, they would delete it and would never ever respond to you. But I mean, I was having a short but random conversation with the head of the European Bioinformatics Institute, part of EMBL, over the weekend, you know, where we were talking about what to put in letters of recommendation. And I guarantee you, if I wrote him an email about that, there would be no response. So it changes the dynamics between you and other people, even if, I mean, we've never met. I'm sure he has no idea who I am.
Alright, so this all sort of feeds into the next thing we want to talk about, which is using social media to connect. The two-way conversation, the potential for this to go beyond just, you know, putting something out there. So you can ask questions, you can be part of a community, you can find like-minded individuals. That, you know, there are communities around, like we said, conferences, around just ideas, around institutions, and you can identify collaboration opportunities. You can see if somebody's working on something similar than you, share resources, or find other ways to work together.
So we actually have a question from Twitter.
Oh,
Wow.
do we? Oh, good. Is somebody in this room? How
The
exciting.
question was about sharing your personal experiences, and in particular asked about personal struggles. The example was Bradley Wojtek's recent blog post talking about his struggle to get funding.
I'm way more conservative on Twitter than I am in real life. Sharing about everything, like politically, sharing about my my struggles personally with what I do in science, talking about science in general, I bet. So I haven't really explored that, mainly because I guess with who I would complain to in a similar situation to that. And for those of you who don't know, this was a junior faculty member at University of California, San Diego, who left a very lucrative data science job to run a lab in neuroscience.
He was a postdoc here too.
He was a postdoc here, I didn't know that, and sort of, has just been beaten down by, a dozen rejections or what have you in a row, and it actually created quite a polarizing response. A lot of people, I think, being like, this demonstrates the failure of the American research enterprise, and other people who were just like, yeah, get used to it. The 13th one might hit. I mean, or not even learn how to write grants. That so much of it is not, once you just need to be at a certain level, and then it's statistical. And to go 0 for 12 while being excellent is not remarkable in this day and age. That he already knew how to write, And so, and that's something I've learned a lot from Twitter, is that by just seeing how much everybody fails all the time, you get rid of a lot of imposter syndrome from that. So I don't know if that was a real answer to the question.
Yeah, it can be useful to, I talked about how many academic jobs I applied for, which is a lot. I haven't talked about how many jobs I was rejected for, but I will talk about that soon. Specifically to thank universities for actually sending rejections. But I agree with Jamie that I'm also a lot more closeted online, just because it is public, it's searchable. Even if you delete the tweet, it's archivable by various things that are just trawling the internet and archiving stuff. So there's really no way to take back what you say. So I also tend to be substantially more closeted there than I would be in real life. But I think that that's part of, when you start to use Twitter, you have to try to decide, what do I want this account to be? Is this a place for me to share my experiences about myself with the world? Is this for me to share my experiences with my family? Is this for me to just talk about data 24 hours a day? I mean, there's people that just do that, right? Is it for me to talk about politics? You have to sort of decide what the scope of your account is going to be. And different people are going to have different feelings about sharing personal details and personal struggles. And I will say that reading other people's personal struggles, even though I don't necessarily share them, has been one of the most, if not the most valuable part of Twitter for me, because it gives you a perspective on the world that you see through somebody else's eyes, and that can be really difficult.
Yeah, I mean, as far as the university goes, there's no restriction. It's really just a personal, how comfortable are you sharing these types of things, knowing that, people in your field, people in your office are going to see them and possibly wonder what you mean by them, or want to talk to you about them and share their own experiences, or maybe, ask why you would say it that way. I mean, it is very public, but like you said, it's really, really valuable, especially in terms of humanizing your research, putting a face behind the science. That a lot of people sometimes feel like science doesn't get to talk about the people as much as it should. So if you're comfortable, go forth and, be evocative. And if you're not, that's fine too. I mean, it's no push one way or the other, but you're free to.
And Twitter as a platform falls kind of on the spectrum in the middle anyway. You've got LinkedIn, which is super professional. You've got Facebook on the other side, which is usually pretty personal. And Twitter can be, most of the time it falls in the middle. It's personal, professional. So it's just finding the right balance. And as you said, it's all about what you're starting out wanting to do. If you do want to go for the more personal, then you have that going into it. But you may find yourself changing over time, and that's okay too.
All right, speaking of connecting, of course, it's a great place to have a dialogue with the public as well. It can sometimes be a hard group to reach with science, especially with science journalism sometimes shrinking in a lot of ways, lay science journalism. So it's a great way to get your message out straight to a very lay public audience in a way that they can also interact with you. And you can answer questions. This is a great way to get out there on Twitter in terms of interaction. You don't always have to produce the first tweet, right? Find places where people are asking questions or having conversations and join them. You don't have to be the one to come up with the first starting point all the time. It's a lot of fun to just identify places where you can be helpful.
UCSF has done, I think we've done a lot of great work on Reddit about getting our scientists out there and answering questions on papers. But I think we'd like to do more on Twitter. So that's something that I think the university is going to be encouraging moving forward is some tweet chats with scientists or the people working directly on science.
For those of you, the room was set to 75
Oh,
degrees, and I
really?
just turned it down to 68.
Oh,
so-
I'm glad it's not just me.
It's like,
I was like, yeah.
And this is just an example from when we did ask scientists of Twitter, how do you use social media? One big reason, amazing ability to connect. And I think it's exactly what you said. Emails get ignored, tweets seldom do, especially useful for early career folk like me. Sorry, it's kind of behind us, but. All right, this is something we
but
started
that,
touching
you know,
on.
I think that really depends on the scope, you know, of how many tweets you get. Like, I know scientists who have tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of followers on Twitter, and they definitely are ignoring tweets just as
Right.
easily as
Yeah.
emails. So, you know,
Well, yeah, if it's an account with like, 100,000 followers, chances are they get a
Yeah.
lot of
yeah.
engagement, and they probably can't keep up with all of it, so keep that in mind. We talked a little bit about using social media to share, extending the impact of your work, and establishing yourself as a thought leader. It's a great way to do that by sharing your findings, your process, your theories, so it allows more people to interact with you and your work, and also it creates that opportunity for conversation for people in the field or outside of it to ask you about what you've done or what you're thinking about. We talked a little bit about humanizing the research. I mean, everybody goes home and does laundry and plays video games at the end of the day. Scientists do too. That's great. Let's remind people of that. And then, of course, sharing other people's work. You don't always have to just use it as a platform for self-promotion. It does actually mean a lot that that you show that you are kind of well-versed in the field and that you are promoting your arena more generally by supporting other people's work as well. And that's actually a great way to connect with other scientists by tagging them and say, hey, great paper by so-and-so, amplify their work.
And these metrics are actually tracked. So you may have heard of the alt metric, which is associated with papers, and a big component of that is tweets that are associated with papers. So if you tweet a link to a paper, that tweet actually then is connected to the paper through what's called the alt metric. And you can go to the alt metric for a paper and actually see all the tweets that have linked to that publication. So you can, in that way, sort of see what the conversation is that's surrounding a paper. Oftentimes it's just people being like, hey, cool paper. Great job, Jill,
Yeah.
but sometimes it's not. And you can see that, whether there's a dialogue. I was a postdoc in the Doudna lab when the Heroes of CRISPR piece came out in Cell, and the Twitter conversation around that was interesting to read. So you can in that way sort of use paper as a hub that connects all the tweets that are talking about it and look and see what the conversation is. And when you think about something like preprints that are coming out where people are now publishing papers directly, there's a lot of discussion about using or considering alternative metrics like tweets as a way to assess what the impact of a paper is or will be, assuming it's ultimately published, or even if it just stays as a preprint. This is a way to record sort of what is the excitement on the internet surrounding this thing. So, you talking about a publication on Twitter actually it creates this chain of reactions that are associated with your reaction.
Just follow the hashtag beer and tacos.
Yeah, so we've done a lot sort of got more engaged with Twitter mainly around preprint sort of advocacy and discussion and stuff like that when Ron Vale sort of pulled me into that world. And it's interesting because one of the things that I find is that people are much more engaged on talking about the process of science than the science itself on social media. And so there is a sort of, which is good because I think those conversations need to happen and aren't happening in other venues, whereas we are, doing a pretty good job just in our normal scientific life of evaluating papers and being made aware of them and stuff like that, but the process story is sort of the reason that I've discovered that I'm very interested in Twitter, or that I get the most value out of. But it definitely, you can get dragged into wasting a lot of time sort of having those same conversations over and over again.
Whether co-first authorship is actually two first authors happens about every 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Or a third of science Twitter goes back and forth.
Fonts, Georgia font versus Arial and stuff like that. But it's, you'll learn a lot, and you learn a lot about, we're very lucky to be at UCSF. It's a great place and really open-minded set of colleagues scientifically and about the process of science in terms of attitudes towards work-life balance and a lot of things that are very, very different from other places. And Twitter has really opened my eyes to how different, certainly my experience has been as a junior faculty member was here compared to colleagues at other institutions. So, yeah, the process. People are very interested in the process.
And you can also ask. I mean, I was curious about, there was a situation in lab where people were debating whether an undergrad should be an author on a paper. And so you can just ask people, what do you think are the criteria for somebody being an author? And then you start the 1/3 of science Twitter debate. But, I mean, you get responses to that are really interesting, and you hear, 5, 10, whatever people's perspective on whatever thing you're curious about. And it can be really informative because it shows you what people think about. When you publish a paper, it's not read by people just at UCSF or at Berkeley, it's read by everybody in science, and so it's important that you know, or at least have an idea of what everybody in science thinks about the decisions that you're making.
Awesome. Another example from Twitter, examples I post about my lab's work, live meetings, ask questions, try to get work of my people in my lab recognized. Examples of
Jonathan is one of those with tens of thousands of people now, so or followers though. So
and very eager to jump in on the conversation
Yeah.
of why scientists use Twitter.
yeah.
It's an
Yeah,
advocate.
he had how many? Like 10?
He basically left like a 10-post long feed on our response. You can see this is only number 4 out of 3, so you
I'd just like to go on record that this is my number 1 in the Eisen Brothers power rankings. Jonathan is so much superior to Mike, and if you consider that he's the younger brother, how much he's accomplished is just like really amazing. So just putting that down on record if anybody wants to tweet that.
Done.
Yeah.
All right, and then of course we want to talk about using Twitter to advocate, publicly support the things that you believe in. Health and science advocacy has always been a part of Twitter, but it's really started to grow, especially as models of funding and ideology seem to threaten the enterprise. So it's a good time to jump in. And public outcry does really make a difference. It makes a difference to show how many people support an idea, whether it's a tweet or a hashtag. People do watch that, and it's meaningful. The university, of course, encourages you to go out there and be active, to lend your voice. The same message, don't be scared, be sensible. All the general codes of conduct apply. Don't harass people and things like that. Watch for HIPAA. All that sort of stuff applies. So don't be scared, just be sensible and you'll be fine. And again, we are here for you. So if you ever find yourself feeling uncomfortable with something that's happened, or you're getting some weird reactions, or you find yourself the target of some intense trolling, we are here for you. So you're not on your own. We can help you out with that sort of stuff too. Advocacy is very popular.
I'd just like to say Twitter has a really bad record of being here for people when they're harassed. So no matter what you're doing, just I know that you guys are going to be supportive and you want to be advocating for things, but I know people who've been harassed very severely, and it's really scary. And Twitter as a company has kind of a problematic record in this respect. So
This is the downside of the anonymity, right? Is that people can use anonymity to create 100 accounts and say whatever it is that they want to say to you. And it can be, I've seen shockingly horrific things that have been said to people. So it's true. And it happens more the more you engage on social issues. I will say that the election, in my opinion, was a sea change on Twitter in terms of what science Twitter was like before November and what it was like after November. And that has fundamentally changed, in my opinion, what it means to be on Twitter.
How's that?
I mean, you see now so much, when somebody starts talking about cutting the NIH budget by 20%, you can imagine that just consumes everybody for days, as it should. But that then means that some of the other issues that may have gone on to Twitter originally, if it was your intention to just post data or whatever, which was not my intention, but if it was, now there's people that are going to be sharing a lot of other issues, and I think justifiably. But it's important to know that the political climate and the social climate of the U.S. and the world is reflected on. And as that changes, you feel that.
Yeah, so the issue of harassment on Twitter is, I mean, that could consume an entire day of us talking about what that means and where it's coming from. And like you said, it could be just one person with 100 accounts and they're all, controlled by some fancy little software program. So it is out there, but again, even if Twitter doesn't have the best track record, we can be here for you. Come to us if something happens. No, it's
I don't
a
mean
good
to be
point make.
negative, I'm just,
It's something that you should be aware of, that if this happens, it's not because of what you said.
Yeah.
Right? This is a pre-existing thing that's out there, and if it happens to you, you can just mute people, you can block people, and try to just let it roll off your back and not spend a lot of time fixating on it, because they really are just trying to get a rise out of you, and the best way to respond to that, as was mentioned earlier, is to not. Just block them, and then it's gone.
Don't play the game. So, I mean, people use Twitter for a lot of different types of advocacy, of course, political advocacy and social advocacy, even advocacy around certain disease topics or research areas. I want to give you a quick example of a case study where UCSF specifically used Twitter advocacy in support of like an organization-wide effort, so you can just sort of see the impact that had. So some of you may have heard about the effort to bring a UCSF research building to CSFG, maintain the Trauma 1 level of the hospital, keep research there. It was very important for the university, it was very important for the hospital. So there were emails that went out asking people to sign petitions, to send letters, to talk to local electeds. And one of the things that we did for the very first time is that we recruited some of our Twitter savvy faculty to be our rapid response team to help spread the message through social. We, of course, were doing a lot on Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn to get the message out, but it's different when it comes from the voice of our people, when the community shows its support for the project itself. So we had 8 faculty who agreed to post things, to retweet us, and it made a really significant difference in helping to spread the word. So there were our tweets, of course, but Kirsten Divens Domingo, if you know her, she's very active on Twitter and very active in advocacy. She had a big stake in having this research center there. The research that's done there, especially for underserved populations, is very close to her. Her mission. Atul Butte, also very helpful in getting the message out here. And then at the end of the day, this all led up as part of a larger campaign to help us get a unanimous Board of Supervisors vote in favor of this building. So it's not the only thing, obviously, it's not the only thing that helped this building happen, but it was really important to show community support, especially internal community support, and to show that it's not just the university speaking on its own behalf, but that there are people behind this who have a big stake in it as well and who feel part of this mission. But that's just one example of Twitter advocacy at our university that was really successful for us. So let's quickly talk about some March for Science things. If you're going to be out there ahead of time, at time, post time, talking about the March for Science on the 22nd, what are some things to watch for? Have you all been tweeting about March for Science? Seen some of the conversations around it?
It's been a lot of conversations.
yeah, I've been
It's been
more
interesting.
lurking in that. I will attend in San Francisco, but yeah, it's been, the people, I strongly, support putting diversity issues and all of these equality and access issues up at the top of the agenda. But that's one of the things where I've been shocked at the response of some of my friends who've sort of received really hateful things about that. So,
Well, if anyone else wants to get a feel for the conversation, I mean, it does sort of, it has sort of become a target. So it is good to be careful of how you want to engage and be mindful of where you're getting yourself into. But a couple of the hashtags, March for Science, Science March, and Global Science March are good ones to follow to get a sense of what people are talking about. People to watch, the Science March DC account is the primary nationwide one. Science March SF is the local one, of course. Science Quiche is Kishore Hari, who was here on campus. He's a UCSFer, very active on social and also very active in Science March. So you'll see things from his account as well.
If you guys are at the back when it comes to down, these folks had to go to class, so they had to leave a little bit early. Come grab a seat, there's a bunch available.
Ways to show support during the march, lots of things, retweeting the different accounts that are supporting the march, sharing articles about the march ahead of time, letting people know that you're going to go, state that you'll be there, you'll see the people will respond in kind, photos of yourself at the march, photos of others at the march, and these are all examples from sort of a, I don't know what to call it exactly, it wasn't a dress rehearsal, but it was like an early version of the march. You might have heard at the AAAS conference in Boston, they did a Stand Up for Science rally at Copley Square in Boston. And it's, the look and feel were very similar to sort of the mission of the Science March. So these are just examples of things that were posted from there. It's so proud to be part of this community. Pictures of signs, pictures of the crowd, all of that lends up. Use the hashtag so that it all lends up to the momentum of the occasion, if you're planning to be there that day.
I just want to say that, I feel like we've spent a disproportionate amount of time on harassment, but I just want to, I think that it's important to say what you think. And if somebody's going to respond to that with a hateful statement, then that's something that happens. But I think that I would, for example, about the March for Science, recommend not filtering what you say. I wouldn't curse at somebody or something, but if you think that diversity is a strong issue, which I have to agree with Jamie on, that should be represented in the March for Science because you can't separate science from people that do science, you should say that. And if there's a small group of people that are able to shut that narrative down by harassing people, then they've actually won, and their voice has been disproportionately amplified by shutting down a conversation through hate speech. Okay, so this is something that happens. It doesn't happen that often compared to the amount we've talked about it today. But I would actually, if it happened, I think you should be aware that it happens so that you know that it's not something that you did. But I would feel confident in being able to share your own opinion and know that if you get a response to that that's hateful, that's not because of what you said. It's because there's a collection of people out there that are willing to do that. That's my opinion.
All right, should we open it up to questions?
Any more coming in from online?
No, just the one.
I
It was
hope
too short.
Oh, was it?
Thanks,
Sure.
Well, I want to talk a little bit about why are you guys on Twitter? You talked a little bit about learning, a little bit of connecting. You go by Fraser Lab, right?
Yeah.
So is it your lab represented, or is it more you? Or
It originally started as just my lab, and then it slowly migrated over to just me. And that was, I think I've changed the password. At one point, definitely the password was known amongst my entire lab. But yeah, I don't know. At some point, there's in this blurring of lines between your professional identity and yourself. Like there's not much of a difference between my lab and me. I live in service of my lab at all times, so I'm pretty comfortable with that. Yeah. So, but I don't have separate accounts for myself in my lab like some people do. I don't know whether you're planning on having
I've been
a
thinking
floor
about
lab
that.
identity versus yourself.
Well, it has to be something besides Floor Lab because it's just terrible. But I'll sort that out later. Part of the reason I got on Twitter was because I was in, as I mentioned, Jennifer Doudna's lab, which is like an RNA biochemistry lab, and I was doing sort of more systems biology, and didn't really have a community of people to talk to about the stuff that I was doing. I could have found other people at Berkeley, but and I did. I had a community there, but there's a much broader community that you can reach out to through Twitter. So some of the first things that I shared were actually sort of confusing aspects of annotations of genes in different organisms that I was perplexed about, and people had things to say about it. I was like, well, this is cool. I can ask questions about my science, and people will respond with that. And that, I think, is still one of my favorite uses. There's a lot of other uses, though. Like I found a strange thing on a lavender bush over the weekend and posted a picture of it on Twitter, and it turns out it's a praying mantis egg case. So, you can access information that's sort of shared among all the people that use Twitter, and it can be for science or for personal reasons or whatever. And that's why I've kept using it.
What would you say is about the balance of like personal versus work stuff for your account?
I almost have zero personal stuff on there. I don't even post personal stuff on Facebook. So, I just fundamentally don't believe in that privacy exists anymore, and so I just feel like what I can do to keep my life private, I do, but I know that it is totally beyond my control, so I don't really post anything personally. Like I'll post personally like I'm on a flight from SFO to Logan Airport, and sometimes I meet up with people, like one of my friends, a colleague of mine, I'd met up with in Logan, like ships passing in the night because of Twitter that we've never have have otherwise. But I don't really post like anything about my family and very little about my political beliefs. I'm pretty non-confrontational on Twitter, which I'm not in my real life or in my lab meetings or anything like that. So it's just sort of a different bar for me. But that might change. I don't know.
I also post very few personal things, but I post a lot more political things.
Yeah.
Just because I think it's important that people know what's happening.
And I'm a whip. Everybody should be like Steve.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah. So you sort of addressed some of this like a little bit in bits and pieces throughout what you were talking about. So I'm a first-year graduate student here, and there's something that just makes me like a little bit nervous about like jumping into big Twitter conversations about science or anything else like I would feel about like joining a conversation of strangers like anywhere in the world. And I was just wondering if you could just like talk a little bit more about that, or maybe
So
help
one
me
of the
get
great
over
things
my
about
nerves.
If you were at a meeting, right, a conference, and there's 8 PIs standing around talking to each other, okay, and you walked up to that, that's like the record-stopping scene from the movie when you walk into the bar and it's like, who's right? But if you say something like that on Twitter, then it's much more likely that they're either going to see it, they might respond, they might not. But I feel like you're going to have much more success engaging in that capacity than you would in a lot of face-to-face capacities, which is kind of weird.
To put that concretely, sitting 2 rows behind you is Ken, I'm on his thesis committee. He studies integrin conformational dynamics. And Ken does great stuff, but he's not a big deal in the world of integrins. And one of the like coolest moments I saw is basically the godfather of that whole field, Tim Springer, just out of the blue, like retweets something that Ken said, because Tim followed me originally or whatever, and like so I retweeted Ken. Ken was like, cool paper on conformational dynamics and of integrins or something else, and then this guy Tim Springer, who National Academy member, hundreds of papers, amazing guy, is retweeting Ken, and like
now he follows me.
Yeah, now he follows. Yeah, right. No, and so it's like, I think that just shows how the level the playing field is, right? Because if you cold emailed Tim Springer, would you ever have expected to be in a conversation with him? And now there's sort of, you have some rapport. I just, sitting sort of to the side of that is like, that's cool.
Yeah,
that's pretty cool.
And I just want to reiterate that. I didn't say who I was. I'm with Sylvan in the graduate division. So I do a lot of Twitter. I mostly use it for science policy. But yeah, what you really see, it's really spectacular, is a total leveling of the scientific hierarchy. You get, first-year graduate students interacting on the same plane as senior faculty. And there's almost like not even a question of, are you a postdoc, are you a student, are you a faculty member? It's really interesting to see that leveling.
I mean, for one thing, you can not even say that in your biography.
Yeah.
Right? You can
A
say
lot of people don't.
scientist at UCSF, and then what are you? Right? You could say grad student, and then nobody knows you're a first year. Maybe you're a graduate, and it doesn't. So that you can just kind of eliminate a lot of this.
I was going to say, in some ways, though, that's really helpful, this idea of, like, yeah, you can engage with people who are higher on the academic rank. But on the other hand, this is somewhat of why Twitter's downfall with, like, trolls and stuff. I mean, I end up getting bogged down in creationist conversations or something like that on Twitter because, literally people who have never gone to college tell me to read a textbook on biology, and I'm like, no, I did read textbooks. I actually have a tweet saying I write the textbooks. So.
Yeah, I mean we could talk about that that's a beer level conversation. I mean, I do think that social media is eroding what it means to be an expert.
Yeah, exactly.
But if you are an expert or becoming an expert, then it's different. But you're absolutely right.
I mean, you can spend infinite time. You just have to decide what's a priority. And part of the reason I don't wade into the political stuff is just like I know I couldn't help myself if I did, and I just don't have the time to engage in it. So it's just like, so.
I think that's also a weakness of the platform itself, because I don't doubt that there is the software available to make the conversations a little bit more filtered or raise the level of conversation. I think it's honestly Twitter's problem. Same with the harassment. They need to figure that out. At the same time, I don't know that it doesn't seem like they have a motivation to do so. So I'm not, it's sort of like watch and wait. It's sort of, Facebook changes all the time. Instagram has changed. They have a curated feed. I think Twitter probably needs to catch up with the rest of the world, but you just don't know as a company if they're going to be able to do that or not.
I should have invited them.
The way that I think about conversations like that, by the way, is not, you're never going to convince the person that's so motivated by creationism that they're going to post to you that you're wrong. But if you have a dialogue that's now preserved, there might be a third party that reads that's on the fence, and then they see this and they're like, oh, that guy did read biology textbooks, right? So I think that, when I engage with somebody on a political or a sensitive scientific topic, I'm never assuming that I'm going to convince the other person. It's a conversation that I'm putting out there so that other people can see that it exists.
Yeah.
I had a quick question about conferences and data and clearly pictures are shared, make a tweet more likely to be shared. I noticed that the AACR conference this year, at least I saw online, that it was the first time I noticed an actual social media policy where they were, posting, like the presenters had the option to put a note like, please don't post, or, yes, okay to post or something. It seems like a kind of thing like most things with social media where the etiquette is kind of catching up, or being created. But what is your thought about that? Like, what is your recommendation when, like, you're at conferences, what is your sort of best practice of things like that? There's plenty of events here where the data isn't published and people are there, and if you see people that are snapping and you think, if this slide is going to go up on Twitter, what are your thoughts about that?
So I feel like conferences more and more recently have been having policies on social media, just over the past couple of years, which is ironic because Twitter's been around for a long time. I'm on the fence about it. I don't know what if you think about something like Cold Spring Harbor meetings, right, you can opt for your video or your presentation to be shared to the meeting attendees. And of course, the meeting attendees then all send the password to 100 other people. So 10,000 people have seen your talk, right? So sort of, on the one hand, what's the difference between doing that and somebody tweeting it, right? On the other hand, you should have the right to present data that you want to be kept private. So I think if you are including data, I always assume that anything I'm going to present at a meeting is public. That said, if you really wanted to try to restrict dissemination of that, you can always put a note at the beginning of the talk.
Yeah, I sort of have willfully ignored official social media policies and relied on my conscience a few times with that kind of stuff. And it's sort of it's a tricky thing. I'm a big believer in that if you are presenting it, it's essentially public anyway. I'm a little uncomfortable with people taking pictures of posters and of slides. I think there's just the ability for something to be kind of lost in the communication of a result as you try and summarize it into 140 characters kind of washes away a lot of sins of disclosing someone else's work. But it's certainly an indication of the fact that the old embargoes and the old apparatus that has been built around communication of scientific results is no longer really valid. And I think rather than trying to shoehorn in Twitter and preprints and stuff like that into the old apparatus, we need to start thinking about how do we evolve the system much more to what we want it to look like. And that's going to be an expectation that anytime you give a talk, somebody's going to be on Facebook Live or Periscope or something like that presenting it, and anybody who isn't lucky enough because of a travel ban or money or whatever is going to be able to watch and interact with it. And so there's a real big difference between sort of a lab meeting where every single person knows each other and works together, and any time where even you are in an audience of that's a UCSF open thing like this to a national meeting, and somewhere in that in that spectrum you should have a pretty reasonable expectation that anything you say can be public.
Yeah, go ahead.
gearing your social media postings towards other people in the science community or towards the general public, or do you think about using tweets as layperson versus scientist?
I have almost no interaction with sort of like what I think of as the general public on Twitter. If anything, it's like I probably interact with the general public more on email because I email like members of my family than I do on Twitter. So I'd say my Twitter, the people who follow me on Twitter and the people I follow on Twitter tend to be like, you know, on their way to getting PhDs or have PhDs, and that's, you know, on me. But
You know, I agree.
you do more, but
I don't know about that. I mean, I think in order to really interact with the general public, you have to rise to a different Twitter rank than either Jamie or myself.
it would be, you know, it would be interesting. We talked about sort of having multiple accounts or multiple streams. Like, it would be interesting. I'd be much more interested in having like a Fraser Lab public, where it was like 140 characters at a time. We just try and explain like why this paper in Upgover 5 style language, right, was important. Or something, than to try and like mix it into my sort of normal sort of thing, or like a hashtag that was like, you know, hashtag public explanation or something, or general explanation or something like that. But we haven't experimented with that much. I mean, honestly, like those of you who are, you know, writing that in an NSF broader impact statement for your next fellowship, like I'm going to create a Twitter account that takes every paper published on my floor and writes a 140 character summary of it in plain language. If I were reviewing that, I'd be like, that's actually concrete, that's actually has a chance of being done. I could see, you know, how you would try to get that into sort of a bunch of high school teachers in San Francisco and across the country to follow that. I could see how that could catch on. And that to me would be worth a lot more than some phony promise of like, I'm gonna go in and explain what different rocks are one time at one school. So that's like a
But if people,
impact.
I mean, if I see people asking,
Yeah.
then I'm definitely
Yeah, sure.
respond. But, you know, if I'm posting cool new paper that I found, you know, the number of lay people that are gonna read and respond to that is 0.
So you're like scrolling down your feed, you encounter some kind of question that someone has
Yeah.
about GMOs or whatever, and then you jump in.
Exactly. Yeah, GMOs can be. There was a middle school teacher from Kentucky that wanted scientists to like email back and forth with his students. And so I responded to that, and now I email back and forth with 2 students in Kentucky. Right. So I mean, stuff like that. If I see it, then I'll engage in that. But I feel like that sort of has to come from the public wanting to have questions and ask them and then want them answered, as opposed to you sort of sending that out yourself. But I mean, if you had an account that was specifically framed,
Yeah.
so I mean, this is we talked a little bit about scope earlier, but I mean, if your followers are all scientists, right, they don't want you tweeting like lay descriptions of your research. So you have to think about who your followers are and what the scope of your account is, and if you want to have an account that's directed at the public, then you should do that. But you should know that the people that are going to follow that are the people that want to receive lay level science information, right? So you have to kind of match. You don't have to do this exclusively, but you have to think about what your identity is and then come up with that, and that'll change over time. But I think it would be hard to go back and forth between trying to be highly technical and for a lay audience.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, I write blogs for lay audience. I try to like do science communication for, you know, general public. Yet on my Twitter, my analytics and stuff, pretty much everybody that follows me is a scientist, or top interest is science news and stuff like that. So I haven't, I mean, maybe I need to go start posting on Kardashian blogs or something to like recruit, but basically
I think Reddit, actually, which we haven't talked about much, is supposed to be really good for reaching out to the
getting them to look, yeah, because I can't really find my audience per se on Twitter, even though I write Medium blogs that are all for like explaining what's a B cell, or like you can't catch the flu vaccine, and stuff that every one of my followers already knows.
But just keep, you know, doing that, because that's not like your, you know, Twitter's one way you're gonna promote that, but I mean, you know, that's not. You're right. I'm not the audience for that, but it doesn't mean that when somebody asks me, I would be like, hey, this guy has a good thing on what a B cell is.
Or if I was really curious about that, then I might retweet that. Right?
But there is certainly an insular looking thing,
Yeah.
and that's why I think
Feels
people
like
are
a
so
bubble.
obsessed with the process of science on Twitter. Like people love to have conversations about the social media embargo policy at AACR much more than the content of the thing that they might be breaking the policy about, or even the productive conversations that occur within that policy. Like it's sort of weird.
So we've actually run out of time.
Oh, no.
So, I mean, I can stick around. I joined with Kevin and Arzu, and I know Jamie's he's got a student who's graduating. Yay! So let's quickly thank our speakers. And a few of us might stick around to answer more questions, but I also want to, give you leave if you have somewhere else you need to be.
If you have more questions, feel free to email us again.
Or
Tweet at us.
tweet at us.
Tweet